Hello dear students, again I'd like to welcome you all to your history class, and today is the last class and this is the last topic for your history syllabus. So we are done with the syllabus, your history syllabus, and the topic which I am going to do today, this is the last topic from your history syllabus. So today I am going to start with the 6 Days War. So in the previous class we did about the formation of the state of Israel, we did about this Suez Canal issue that was in the previous class, and today I'll do the 6 Days War. So what was the 6 Days War? So from the word itself 6 days, you can understand this war, it went on for 6 days. So 6 Days War, which was fought between Israel and Egypt or the Arab nations, it was on 1967, year 1967. So first we will do the causes of the war. The main cause, again, it was the formation of the state of Israel. So when the state of Israel was formed in 1948, then you all know this, that Egypt, Syria and Jordan, they attacked Israel. So one of the cause was the formation of the state of Israel, because the Arab nations, okay, they did not want it. They did not want it to accept that the state of Israel was formed. Then again the second reason was regarding this river Jordan, because Israel adopted the policy of diverting water from the Jordan river to the Negev desert, and this became the main cause of tension. So on one side Israel wanted to divert the water flowing from river Jordan towards their side, towards Israel, that is Negev desert, and on the other side the Arabs now, they wanted to divert the flow of the water from the river Jordan to Lake Galilee. And in 1965-66, because of this, Israel bombed Syria, and again they started to divert water towards their side. Okay, so first cause was the formation of the state of Israel was one of the cause for this war. Second was regarding this water, okay, flowing from river Jordan. Another cause was this Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, and the Fatah movement, F-A-T-A-H, Fatah movement, they started to go against Israel. And what was the result? The situation became more tensed. And again now, most of these activities were initiated from the west bank of river Jordan and Golan Heights. And now Israel felt that the only solution for this problem, okay, so the only solution to wipe out this problem was war. The next cause, now again another anti-Israel group, that is the Ba'ath, B-A-T-H, Ba'ath party came to power in Syria, and this party was totally against Israel. Again now taking advantage of the Cold War. So that time what was happening? The Cold War was going on. So taking advantage of the Cold War, both Egypt and Syria, they got a lot of arms and ammunitions from Russia. Okay, so these are the causes of the war. Now the course of the war. Now President Nasser of Egypt, now he took a military stance against Israel. He then asked the UN peacekeeping forces to leave Sinai desert. At that time the UN peacekeeping forces were there, okay, in Sinai desert, just to make sure that there is no conflict or there is no war between Israel and Egypt. So now what? President Nasser ordered UN to remove their forces from Sinai desert, and what did Egypt do? Egypt closed the Gulf of Aqaba, so that A-Q-A-B-A, Aqaba, so that the Israeli could not use this Gulf, and Mediterranean Sea was also closed down. And as a response, what did Israeli army did? They became activated, and Syria and Jordan also joined Egypt in this crush Israel. So Syria and Jordan, they were on the side of Egypt, okay, to crush down the Israelis. Israeli army, they captured, now what did they do? Though the Israeli army were very less in number, they destroyed 2/3 of aircrafts of Egypt. They captured Sinai desert, Gaza Strip from Egypt, Golan Heights they captured from Syria, and Damascus was bought under the Israeli gun within 6 days. So all this happened within 6 days. So Golan Heights, Sinai desert, Gaza Strip was captured within 6 days, and that's why this war is known as the 6 Days War of 1967. These were the causes. Now, what was the result? It was a great success for Israel. Now, this time Israel ignored the UN order. Before, every time UN, when UN ordered to cease fire, Israel ceased fire, and when UN ordered to give away, to give the land, or let's say to give the territories which were occupied by Israel, give it back to Egypt, that time the Israel, they listened and obeyed the order of UN. But now UN order was ignored by Israel and did not return those captured territories. These territories now became buffer zone between Israel and Arab nations. But the only problem was now how to deal with that. Remember, 1 million refugees. They were known as Palestinian refugees. When we did the first Arab-Israel war, 1 million Arabs were evicted. They were removed from those areas, Gaza Strip, West Bank of River Jordan. So now these 1 million Arabs, how to deal with these people? So the refugee camps, now they were refugee camps which were, now these Arab people, they lived in where? They lived in the refugee camp on the West Bank and Gaza Strip. And now this war was a great humiliation for Arab states, especially for Nasser, because what happened to President Nasser? His prestige was lost like anything, because in every war Egypt lost and his prestige was also lost. So now President Nasser, he realized that it was not possible to free Palestine from Israel without foreign help. Now President Nasser, he realized that they needed help of foreign countries to fight, to win the Israelis. And again they did not lose hope. Again President Nasser, he wanted to attack Israel and get back and free Palestine from the Israelis. So this was the result. This was the causes. We did the causes, the course, and the result of the 6 Days War. Now the next war is the Yom Kippur War of 1973. So the causes of the war. Now Israel's victory in the 6 Days War of 1967 gave her control over territories 4 times its previous size. So now when Israel, in the 6 Days War, Israel captured Golan Heights, Israel captured Sinai Desert, Israel also occupied Gaza Strip, and now her size, her territory became larger. Egypt lost, what Egypt lost? 23,500 square miles at Sinai Peninsula. Egypt also lost Gaza Strip, and Jordan lost West Bank and Eastern Jerusalem. Syria lost Golan Heights, and the Arab states, they could not tolerate this condition. So all these territories were lost by the Arab nations. And PLO under its leader Yasser Arafat, the leader of PLO, Palestine Liberation Organization, was Yasser Arafat. Now he wanted to take some further action against the Israelis. Another reason for this Yom Kippur War was Anwar Sadat. Now he became the new president of Egypt after President Nasser in 1970. And when he became the president, he found that Egypt was economically a troubled nation. So economically, Egypt was very weak. In this situation, Egypt could no longer afford to continue its endless crusades against Israel. Now, economically, Egypt was very, very weak, and now Egypt could not afford another war. So, what President Anwar Sadat wanted to do, he wanted to make peace with Israel, and he wanted to recover the Sinai Desert. But he realized that after the 6 Days War, he realized that peace was not favorable for Egypt with Israel, because he thought that Israel would not negotiate and come to peace with Egypt. So what Anwar Sadat thought was to attack Israel again, even though they were unsuccessful, even though Egypt was defeated. At least Anwar Sadat thought that it would convince the Israelis to make peace with Egypt. And what did Anwar Sadat do? Now he decided to attack Israel with the help of Syria, hoping that America would act as a mediator in future peace talks. So again, Anwar Sadat wanted to have a good relation with America so that in future, if there is peace between, because Anwar Sadat wanted to make peace with Israel. So if there is a peace with Israel, then America would act as a mediator, let's say a middleman who would negotiate peace between Israel and Egypt. He formed a new alliance with Syria. Now he made partnership with Syria and made a plan to attack Israel. The Egyptian felt more confident because now they had what? Modern Russian weapons, and their army had been trained by Russian experts. Now the course of the war. Now when the actual war began on October 1973, many of the Israeli soldiers were away from their posting for observing the holy festival of Yom Kippur on Day of Atonement. Now the Israelis, now what happened was the Yom Kippur war. So this Yom Kippur was the holy festival of the Jews or Israelis. So most of the soldiers, they had gone home, okay, from their posting. They were far away from their posting to observe this festival. And on this day, Egypt attacked Israel. Naturally, the Arab armies made impressive advancement with their up-to-date Soviet weapons. Iraqi forces joined the war, and Syria received support from Jordan. So Iraq also joined Syria, and Jordan also joined Egypt in this war. So in the beginning, in the initial stage, they were able to win this war. They were defeating the Israeli soldiers. But after several days, what happened? Israeli army counterbacked, and Arabs were in critical position. They lost huge soldiers and war equipments. And on October 25, 1973, Egypt and Israel agreed to cease fire by the intervention of America. In the initial stage, the Arabs were winning, that is Egypt, Syria, Jordan and Iran. They were winning this war. They were able to defeat the Israelis. But again, what happened after a few days? The Israelis counter-attacked the Arab forces and defeated the Arab forces. And they were able to win the war. So when there was an order from UN and America to cease fire, to end the war came to an end. Both agreed, okay, Egypt and Israel agreed to end the war. And what was the result? Israel, though they became victorious, they lost men, okay, many of the soldiers were killed or they died, and many of them were wounded. People started to criticize the government for lack of preparedness. Okay, the people started to criticize the government because the government was not prepared. And the Prime Minister of Israel, Golda Meir resigned from his post in 1974. And Egypt again suffered military. So Egypt was defeated, but though Egypt was defeated in the initial stage, Anwar Sadat was successful, and this enhanced, that is lifted his prestige. And Egypt and Israel in 1979 signed a peace treaty. But for Syria, this Yom Kippur war was a disaster because Syria never thought that Egypt would agree to cease fire. Okay, Egypt would agree to stop this war and make peace with Israel. Okay, and because of this, Egypt was voted out from the Arab League. And finally, this Arab oil producing states tried to bring pressure on USA and the other Western European states which were friendly to Israel by reducing oil supplies. So America and other European countries. Okay, so what did the Arab nations do? Those Arab nations which were producing oil, they now decided to stop supplying oil to America and other Western European nations. Okay, because they were friendly with Israel. And because of this, there was shortage in Europe, Western Europe. And the last topic, this is the Camp David Accord. So this camp, C-A-M-P, Camp David Accord, C-A-M-P, Camp David Accord, which was signed in 1979. So what were the reasons for signing this accord? So after the Yom Kippur War, President Anwar Sadat, now he became convinced that Israelis, now again In the Yom Kippur War also, in every war, it was Israeli who became successful. So Anwar Sadat, now he became convinced that Israeli could not be defeated, and it was foolish and waste of time and waste of resources, okay, to win this war. Then Arabs now, they cannot ignore the fact that the formation of Israel was a reality, and he knew that PLO, now what Anwar Sadat knew that was PLO and other Arab states, okay, would oppose Anwar Sadat if he made peace with Israel. In spite of all this danger, Anwar Sadat, he was ready to make peace with Israel. Like Egypt, on the other side, Israel also had to face a lot of economic problem. And America on the other side was putting pressure on Israel to settle dispute with some of the Arab states. So thus Israel accepted Anwar Sadat's offer to make peace. Sadat visited Israel, and Israel Prime Minister also visited Egypt. And finally, it was US President Jimmy Carter, he negotiated peace between Arab and Israeli at a place called Camp David near Washington. Camp David is the name of a place where this peace treaty was signed between Egypt and Israel in 1979. And what were the terms? The state of war between Egypt and Israel, which started in 1948, now came to an end. Israel agreed to vacate, empty. Remember the Sinai desert, which was captured by Israel from Egypt? Now Israel agreed to vacate the Sinai desert. Egypt also agreed to remove the blockade of Suez Canal and the Gulf of Aqaba so that Israeli ships could use the Suez Canal. Remember, Egypt had blocked Suez Canal and Gulf of Aqaba. So Egypt now removed this blockade, and Israel could use this Suez Canal and Gulf of Aqaba. And lastly, Egypt promised not to attack Israel again and guaranteed to supply Israel oil from the recently opened wells in southern Sinai. So Egypt promised not to attack Israel and also promised to supply oil to Israel. Now this Egypt worked on her own. Egypt did not take decision from any of the other Arab nations, and because of this, there were other Arab nations who were not happy, let's say, with Anwar Sadat. And Anwar Sadat, he was condemned, he was disapproved for signing this accord. And the next is Israel PLO Peace Accord or Oslo Peace Accord. Now, this Camp David Accord, okay, this treaty, the Camp David Accord, was again rejected, condemned, disapproved by PLO also and most of the Arab states except Sudan and Morocco. Now, world opinion went against Israel, but still America continued to play an active role in protecting peace and permanent settlement in this area. The other Arabian countries were against the Camp David Accord. So as I told you, PLO, Palestine Liberation Organization, and many of the other Arab nations, they were totally against this peace accord. They did not want Egypt to sign this peace accord with their enemy Israel. And what happened soon after that? Anwar Sadat was assassinated by some of the extremist Muslim soldiers, and that was on October 1981. They believed that he had betrayed the Arabs. But again, the successor of Anwar Sadat, Hosni Mubarak, he continued with this Camp David Accord because he also wanted to make peace with the next president of Egypt. Hosni Mubarak also wanted to make peace with the Israelis. Then the situation also changed when new government came to power in Israel after the election of June 1992. The new Israeli Prime Minister Isaac Rabin, he was prepared to make concession for lasting peace. So on the other side, the Israeli Prime Minister also wanted to make peace with Egypt. And PLO leader Yasser Arafat, he also responded. Now finally, PLO also, Palestine Liberation Organization under Yasser Arafat also, he wanted to make peace with Israelis and signed the Oslo Peace Accord. Oslo Peace Accord is the peace accord OSLO, Oslo Peace Accord, is the accord which was signed between PLO, Palestine Liberation Organization, and Israel. It was signed in September 1993, and these were the clauses or the terms. Israel formally recognized PLO. So Israel recognized PLO. PLO also recognized Israel and promised to give up terrorism. And lastly, the Palestinians were given limited self-rule on, remember this PLO, these Palestinian refugees, okay, they belong to PLO. So these Palestinian refugees, now they were given limited self-rule on west bank of River Jordan, because they were refugees, they were taken out, they were removed from west bank of River Jordan and Gaza Strip in the first war. Now they were given limited self-rule in this area, and Israel troops would be withdrawn from this area. So Israel, they will withdraw their troops, and now this Palestinian refugees, they will be allowed, okay, to again go back and settle here on west bank of River Jordan and Gaza Strip. So this way peace accord was signed between between Egypt and Israel, and also with PLO and Israel. Okay, so with this we have come to the end of the syllabus. Okay, thank you.